Take their seats. We'll get started. Please want to call this meeting of the Assembly to order. Madam Clerk, please do the roll call.
Assemblymember Johnston. Here. Assemblymember Peterson.
Present.
Assemblymember Domboski.
Present.
Assemblymember Flynn.
Present.
Chair Trainey.
Present.
Vice Chair Gray Jackson.
Honored to be here.
Assemblymember Evans.
Here.
Assemblymember Steele.
Here.
Assemblymember Starr.
Here.
Assemblymember Honeman.
Here.
Assemblymember Hall.
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Evans, would you lead us in the pledge, please, sir? Thank you, Mr. Evans. Next item of business, minutes of previous meetings. There are none. Mayor's report. Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. We're moving fast.
My apologies. I was learning things from the chief. Speaking of which, I want to make sure that we thank Chief Mew for his great service and for what he's about to do, given the upcoming visit. And I wanted to make sure the Assembly was aware that I'd appointed a new chief beginning in a few weeks. It's Chris Tolley, and I hope he gets a chance to come by and speak with each of you. I also want to let you know that we had removed the acting from Mark Johnstone's title at ML&P, and he is now the general manager over there. I wanted to inform you that we have had our first meeting of the external SAP review team, and it was very insightful, and the questions were, I think, going to lead us in a very strong direction. And then the formal part of my presentation here, I wanted to officially inform you, and there's a memo that's been distributed to give official notification of upcoming negotiations with the Anchorage Municipal Employees Association. And that is the extent of my report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there questions, Mr. Members, for the Mayor? Please push your button if there is. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for the heads up on Mr. Johnstone. I don't know him real well, so I'm looking forward to getting to know him a little bit better. And also, my thanks to Chief Mew as well for his service, but also I know he's working diligently with the Secret Service on the impending visit and hopes to be able to make a public announcement in the next couple of days so that people have an understanding of what they can expect in terms of road closures or restrictions as we accommodate the Commander-in-Chief. And that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Mayor, there's been a lot of rumors floating that City Hall will be shut down because of the President's need for security. Do you have any information on that for our employees? That are a lot of rumors floating around downtown. Yeah. So our employees can plan for if they're going to be off on Monday or not, or what's going on.
Mr. Chairman, the administration will be making a decision on that subject in the next 48 hours, and we'll be announcing that. At this time, we're still trying to gather information from the federal agencies responsible for security downtown over the next week. And when we have a clear enough picture of what those security requirements are, we'll be able to make a good choice about the impacts on City Hall.
Thank you. We've been asked not to have any meetings down there during that time period, and we're going to live with that requirement. We appreciate that, letting our employees know ahead of time. Thank you. Let's see, committee reports. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to announce two committee meetings. Tomorrow at noon, I have Ethics and Elections Committee meeting in room 240, and at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, I'm having the Marijuana Committee meeting at 4 o'clock in room 155. We did move that meeting ahead by one day due to a conflict on Thursday. Following those two announcements, Ms. Johnston and I have just returned from the AML meeting in Ketchikan, and I want to begin by kind of patting both of us on the back about the money that we saved the municipality while we were there. The weather was absolutely perfect. Sunshine every day, and Ms. Johnston insisted on hiking to the meetings, which we happened to be in a hotel in excess of 2 miles away from the meeting room, and at the rate of cabs, if we'd each used an individual cab, we figured we raised you about $2,600 in cab fees. So, but I had to buy a new pair of shoes on my return. Don't ever go to a meeting with Ms. Johnston. We got out of that, and then she went for a hike up the mountainside. Crazy. AML, it was a great meeting. I actually flew in a day early. AML had put together a committee on a sustainable budget, and I had the fortune of being named the chair. And we came in and spent about 6 hours in conversation with communities all around the state that were represented on the committee. And needless to say, we've all got major concerns about what's going to be happening with budgets and how that impacts individual communities, because just with the recent budget cuts that we've seen, the communities are realizing that the revenue share is very important to them, but what they're also realizing is the revenue share is a pretty minor part of what's impacting individual communities, as we can see with our own community with the loss of school bond reimbursement, loss of capital projects, loss of troopers in Girdwood. The costs that we're going to be picking up to replace what the state is choosing not to fund in the future is some major numbers. It's hard enough for us to deal with it, but some of these small communities absolutely have no resources to deal with it. And one of the communities represented in this meeting didn't even know how they were going to be making their payroll this month. So there's some serious budget crunch coming on out there. So we will be ready within probably 3 weeks as soon as we get done drafting the recommendations of the report and that adoption by the Board of Directors of AML, be ready to share. But I can let you know that what we believe is we absolutely believe in prudent cuts in the budget. We think you need to be responsible in doing that. And what we also know after this year is when the legislature starts costing big cuts, they cut and we bleed. And we're very, very concerned about that. So I think we're going to end up with a one voice saying we've got to look at new revenue sources in order to be able to deal with what we've got coming at us. And as I said, here shortly we'll be able to share an actual report out once the AML board takes action on it. Thank you.
Mr. Hall, was there any discussion on the Ketchikan case down there?
Beg your pardon?
Was there any discussion among AML members on the Ketchikan case relative to education?
Oh, well, you know, it's pretty obvious that they're optimistic that they're going to continue to rule in that. And if they do, then there's going to be major impacts on the state budget, because I think statewide that number is about $250 million.
I think we're about $240 million of that.
Right.
Ms. Johnston, so you did bring him back. Do we have to pay for his chiropractic care or what?
Doesn't he look a lot healthier?
He does, ma'am.
And all I can add to Ernie's is that I think it's really important that we as Anchorage fully embrace AML, and that the whole state needs to have one voice as we go into the next 3 or 4 years. And we, you know, this could be an opportunity for us to redesign what state and local government looks like, but we have to make sure as we do it that it's not just Anchorage we're thinking about, but we're thinking about the whole state as a whole. And I think it's very important that Anchorage is part of this discussion and we take leads in support of the vision. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I remember when Pelican cease to exist because of no money. And my fear is we're going to see other cities go the way of Pelican. Mr. Starr, sir.
No report.
Mr. Peterson, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. No report tonight.
Mr. Evans, sir.
No report, Mr. Chair, but can I have a moment of personal privilege?
Absolutely, sir.
This Saturday, I was among a lucky group that were able to attend Fire Ops 101 that was put on by the Firefighters Union. It basically runs the people through a number of simulations about what firefighters do on a normal basis, car extractions, and you go into a fire. And it was all very good. And having been a former police officer myself, I always kind of viewed firefighters as a bit of slackers. They get to sleep while they're on the job and on the pay.
Okay, remember he's down that way if you want to throw things.
But I can tell you that my opinion on that was changed. It was a very eye-opening experience to see what these guys do on a daily basis. It was very hard. I was beat by the end of the day. But I did appreciate it and got a much better insight as to what our firefighters and firefighters everywhere do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I think at the same time you were doing that, they had a call out. I think 25 rigs responding to that terrible fire. And so they've got that going. They've got the real fires going on, and they managed to do everything. Ms. Gray Jackson, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little warning. I have quite a bit to say, but I'll talk as fast as I can. Okay. So the Budget and Finance Committee, we met on August 20th, and the Treasurer provided an update on revenues. The projected end-of-year revenues is $3.5 million positive. Within the first 6 months of the year, the tobacco tax revenues are 3% higher than last year. And then we got a report from the OMB Director on the 2015 General Government Operating Budget. And as of July 31st, we're 58.1% through the fiscal year, and the percent of budget spent and encumbered is 53.8%. The OMB Director also provided an update on the 2016 budget. As everybody knows by now, we have an $11 million budget shortfall, and it's due to RCA. Part of it is due to RCA's decision that prohibits municipal light and power from paying dividends to general government effective for the 2016 budget year, and that's $7 million. And the RCA is a regulatory commission of Alaska. The state revenue sharing reduction is going to be $4 million, and so to help with this situation, the departments are required to find this year a 0.5% savings so it can go in fund balance and we can use that money towards the 2016 budget, and also a 2% savings when they're building their 2016 budget. In the capital budget, we were told that the mayor hasn't decided on capital project bonds yet, but he's looking at all fiscal issues at both the state level and the local level. And we were also advised that the municipality has retired $35.6 million in bond debt. Briefly, the fire sprinkler exemption that we've been talking about for months, we had Mr. Michelson attend the meeting who represented the home builders, and there was lengthy discussion that took place on this issue. Budget Committee member, Ms. Dombowski, she recommended limiting the exemptions to 10 years because now it's indefinite, and we're going to continue discussion on that at the next meeting. And we're also going to have some discussion on the nonprofit property tax exemption, and that'll take place at a future meeting. The Budget Advisory Commission reported that its September meeting will be a planning session so that they can discuss what they'll be doing next year. And then on August 13, we had an SAP Review Committee special meeting, and the presentation was by the administration. And that's when the administration advised us that they are pausing the SAP project. And this pause will include a 2-week notice to all the contractors, and they're going to end the lease with the Sunshine Mall. And the assembly members that attended, I think there were 6 of us, thought that this was a good idea, including myself. The pause is not going to cause any MOA layoffs, so that's a really good thing. And as the mayor mentioned, the External Review Committee met, and Alden Thurn, who's the deputy CFO, is the chair of that committee, and he is going to provide a report to the Assembly SAP Review Committee on a monthly basis. And we had that first meeting on August 20, and Alden reported that the committee is getting up to speed on the current status, and they're going to have multiple meetings outside and within the MOA, but we'll continue to have a report every month right after the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Last but not least, let's move. There was a press release that was sent out to everybody, and I hope that you got a chance to read it, but if you didn't, maybe you saw the news coverage that we got. But anyway, the task force that was established in February 2014, we've been working really hard. There's representatives from the state, from the school district, and other entities, and Mr. Trainey and I brought this to Anchorage in December of 2013. Anyway, we are really, really pleased because Anchorage, our beautiful community, is going to join 44 other cities throughout the United States, and we're all invited by First Lady Michelle Obama to the White House for a reception on September 16th from 9 to 3:30, and that's because Anchorage has gotten the gold medal in all 5 of the Let's Move goals, and so we're really, really excited about that. Alden Thurn is going to be joining me as we represent Anchorage at the White House on September 16th. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Flynn, sir.
AMAT's 1:30 Thursday.
Ms. Dembowski, ma'am.
Well, Mr. Flynn's going to win for brevity. Mr. Chair, I still have not yet introduced my ethics opinion from the Board of Ethics, so I'll just make a quick disclosure on item 9E5. It's for contracts awarded between $50,000 and $500,000. There's a line item for AFD. It's for first responder coats and pants. I suspect my husband's going to be wearing pants, so he may benefit from this one. But I think it's de minimis in the overall scheme of things. So I hope I can participate.
Ma'am, you're directed by the chair to participate, and I hope you don't send him out without him.
Me
Otherwise,
too.
we'll have you here for something else.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as committee reports go, the Community and Economic Development Committee has had 2 meetings since our last assembly meeting. One was on August 12th, in which we discussed, we had a very robust discussion on cell towers. It was very helpful. The Planning Department, Erica McConnell, gave us a wonderful presentation on current code and process, and also what other communities are doing with new technology to minimize impact. We had Quincy give us, from the Department of Law, gave us an update on FCC rules. Industry comments were there. GCI and AT&T, as well as Verizon, all had people there. Becky Pearson from GCI gave a very informative oral presentation, and a letter that outlines that oral presentation can be found on our webpage. We also had a number of community councils present. If I were to guess, I would say there's probably about 15 community councils that were present at that meeting. The room was packed. So residents brought up a number of concerns regarding an extra layer of protection and impact mitigation for residential cell towers. They wanted an evaluation of residential cell tower height, fall zones in residential areas. Also, there was also discussion about potentially fast-tracking the camouflage type of cell towers. So that was all discussed. A work group has been formed. Mr. Peterson and Mr. Hall and the P&Z member that's on our committee, Tony Kange, are all working together to basically draft a cell tower ordinance. So once that is drafted, I expect, I think I wrote it down here somewhere, probably by the 29th of September, we'll have a potential either outline or draft ordinance that'll come to the committee, and we'll discuss it before it's introduced to the whole body. But it should be, that's a pretty tall order considering all the issues that they have to tackle. It's very complicated, but I have every bit of confidence they can get it done. And then, okay, so at the August 19th meeting, we did discuss AO 2015-83 just briefly, and I will even say this on the record, Mr. Flynn was right. We are going to ask to postpone that item indefinitely. The Planning Department and industry are working together to come up with an amendment or come up with a new AO. But part of the reason we're postponing that one is because they want to deal with architectural features, and the title didn't allow that one in the last ordinance. So, that one should come back before the committee on the 16th of September. So we're plugging right along with that. And then the other thing that we had a very lengthy conversation about on August 19th was marijuana land use zoning. We talked about electrical requirements for grow operations, size and scale of operations, also potential limitations, zoning, land use, obviously, There was a discussion of a potential opt-out of specific industries, maybe commercial or growing or testing, bringing utility carriers to the discussion, exterior signage, marketing restrictions, smoke clubs. There was a lot discussed, and I was very grateful. Assembly Vice Chair Gray Jackson was there. Obviously, Mr. Chair, you were there. And Mr. Steele also attended our meeting. So it was great to have so many Assembly members in addition to the regular members. Our next meeting, I did cancel the meeting for tomorrow. We need to give everybody a little bit of time. There's a lot of work on our plate right now, so everybody's really working to get that done. But tomorrow's meeting's canceled, but the meeting on September 2nd will be a meeting of our committee, but we're going to invite the marijuana committee to come to our meeting as well, because we expect that the department will be presenting the same potential draft ordinance for marijuana land use and regulation that they presented to the marijuana committee previously. But it's nice to get those who are drafting land use and zoning restrictions on the same page as those who are looking at other parts of marijuana law, so that we can kind of be working in a symbiotic relationship. So that will be September 2nd, 10 a.m. at City Hall, room 155. We have a new website up. If you go to muni.org and click on Assembly and then Committees, you'll see, just look for the title of our committee. It's called Community and Economic Development Committee. And if you click on it, you'll see our webpage. And not only does it have all of our agendas and what we're talking about, but you can just glance at the top. I have to give a shout out to Lisa in the clerk's office. She's right over there doing the minutes. She created an awesome web page. It's very user friendly, so you could just click on it and you can see over the next month what the topics are going to be and what dates, so you can kind of have an idea of what's coming. But this is a very active committee, so if you're interested at all in any of these land use items or development items, or we potentially are going to be talking about tax increment financing, this is the committee to watch. So I'll just throw it out there.
Mr. Nebusky, you're doing a great job. I wanted to thank you very much for heading up that committee. The other thing that came up was also AWU's demand on water for the marijuana. And power is one thing. We've got to make sure we've got the water coming in, the water going out, supply considered.
That's a good point. And Mr. Chair, I know a lot of the department directors are here tonight. So my intent was to reach out to MLMP and AWWU and ask them to attend the meeting on 9/2. That way we could understand from the enterprise perspective what strains they expect on the systems.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Steele, sir.
Speaking of enterprise, on the 13th we had an enterprise committee meeting, and we heard from MLMP and the port, and they're just an update, and that's it. No other.
Mr. Honeman, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did have the most recent Public Safety Committee meeting this past Wednesday, the 19th. Another shout out to the clerk's office. Ms. Miranda Honest is really getting us things much more organized, and we'll have, I believe, a much better scheduling ahead, and you'll know what's coming up and what's on our agenda. So that's just wonderful. And so thanks again to the clerk's office, Ms. Honest, as well. And so we did have the 4 ordinances that will be on for a public hearing tonight, and I will report back the committee's at least review of those ordinances. We did have the municipal attorney there, Mr. Falsey, as well as the municipal prosecutor, Ms. Seneca-Thino. I know Mr. Hall was wanting to be there, but he was otherwise running through mountains or trails or something in Ketchikan, wearing out his tennis shoes or his shoe leather. And Ms. Nebusky was otherwise engaged with other as well. So, but we did have a good discussion and a good review of the ordinances, and we'll come back with that. Along with that, we have a fairly busy agenda each and every meeting. We try to make it an hour. We'd love to have you. And I did note, is it Wednesday, September 2nd? Is that 10 a.m., Ms. Nebusky? Okay, so I would encourage members of the Public Safety Committee also, since it's dealing with marijuana, to try to attend that if you can put it in your schedule.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Ms. Jones, would you like to bring Rose up here and talk to the Assembly about who the new lady is and what she does for us? Thank you, ma'am.
I'm Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk, and I would like to introduce the Assembly to Rose Foley. Rose Foley is the new Assembly Budget Analyst, and she is here. She has been working very hard the last 2 days getting our 2015 budget reductions, which Ms. Gray Jackson mentioned, as well as preparing for our 2016 budget for the entire Assembly Department. So she is also here to assist all of you with budget issues that come up with your respective issues, and she will be staffing several of the committees that you discussed recently. So we have thrown it all at her, and she's been doing more than treading water. She's been doing great for the last couple of days. So please welcome her aboard. She's in the office. Stop by, give her a call, send her an email. But we're just really happy to have her on board.
Welcome aboard, Rose, on behalf of the Assembly. It's
Thank
great
you.
to have you here. Let's see, Mr. Peterson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to tell Rose, congratulate you on getting this position, and I'm looking forward to working with you. I thought you did an excellent job when you were working with a member of the Finance Committee down in Juneau, and so I think you're hitting the ground running, and I think you're going to be an asset to the people of Anchorage. Thank you.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to formally welcome you aboard, and not to take you away from any of our other Assembly members, but you and I are going to be working really closely together. I have a lot in store for you, and I'm sure you already read the Budget and Finance Committee's work plan, and I look forward to meeting with you later on this week. So again, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. There's another question. Just again, Rose, thank you very much for joining us. Before I go on to the rest of the meeting, Chief LeBlanc, would you come here for a minute? Tell us all about Spice. I want to know how many have been picked up. Because I saw a guy on TV saying, I'm addicted and I'm going to keep getting used again, keep getting picked up.
Yes,
Oh.
I was there when he gave that interview, Mr. Chair. We've had over 200 transports since we've been tracking it mid-July. That particular night that you're talking about, we had 7 transports in the course of about 35 minutes. There were 6 people that went down all at once. The mayor has convened a group that met today to put together a plan working with APD, ASP, AFD, and the folks from Brother Francis and Beans Cafe to get a handle on this. We're now experiencing a little bit of dispersion in Spice. There seems to be 2 types. There's the type that knocks them down, turns them into very challenging patients. That's principally centered around the 3rd and Carluck area. There is another version of Spice that seems to be the happy Spice, if you will, and we're seeing some of that appear now South Anchorage, Diamond Center and beyond. So we're basically addressing it on 2 fronts with multiple city agencies, with the mayor's help and the manager's help, trying to put together a semi-task force to address the issue. But we actually picked up a couple people Sunday that still had hospital bracelets on from being released that day or the day before. So we're getting a lot of repeat. Frequent flyers. Eric Schuneman, who's the EMS assistant chief, is putting together he has put together a number of very comprehensive profile statistical summaries showing the ages from 12 to 69, average age about 38, 39, and again with about 80% of the Spice responses in the 3rd and Carluck area. But we're also pulling it now by name so we can hopefully identify and intercede with those people that seem to appear every day, like the client that you saw give the interview.
Okay, I've got some assembly questions. One other thing, Chief, have we been giving out any tickets, or whether the police department has, have we busted anybody yet for selling this stuff?
I'll have to defer to Chief Mew for that.
Chief?
My understanding is that Chairman Trainee and members of the Assembly. My understanding is that we've identified, don't know the exact number, so I'll say a handful of people that may be responsible for selling the product in the 3rd and Carluck area that seems to be in that population of homeless people. I think we've arrested one of them already. Can't tell you it was for spice. I think it might have been for some other crime, a warrant, something like that. But we're working on him as well as several other people to try and make a longer-term, larger case that will have larger consequences to it. We haven't made those cases yet.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Honeman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our colleagues here. At the Public Safety Committee meeting, we did have, as you remember, a good detailed informational presentation from both police and fire and the health department around spice in our community. And I owe Mr. Falsey an written letter. I will make sure I get that to you tonight. We are looking into, or the municipal prosecutor, municipal attorney are looking into ordinances from around the country that might be helpful to the police in the actual sale of a substance that causes a serious health concern, or an ambulance ride per se, or hospitalization, and making it a misdemeanor crime. Currently, if you try to identify spice in a packet by formula, if you remember, it became very onerous and chase your tail. So, Chiefs, is there, and I'd like to be included in with the task force, if you will, or is there any need to maybe perhaps do emergency ordinance, rush this thing, or do we have time to try to look through some of the other ordinances? Would it be of help to have an ordinance that could make it a misdemeanor crime for the distribution of these products that are making people sick?
Well, of course, it'd be helpful if we have such an ordinance that works in practice. We've tried that already, and we have state statute, and we have Seneca, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we still have the municipal misdemeanor on the books. It just doesn't work very well, and so we've been using the packaging ordinance that came along later. Am I right on that, Seneca? Do I have that wrong? Okay, so apparently we did repeal it, but we weren't using it because it, practically speaking, wasn't working. The chemical compound gets changed faster than we can keep the language of the statute up to it, faster than the labs can keep up with the tests, faster than field tests get made. So linking it to the compound was looked good on paper, but wasn't working in practice.
Thank you, Chief.
But if somebody comes up with some magic language, that fixes that, we'd certainly be interested in it, and we'll help with that.
Thank you. I'll follow up again with make sure I get it in writing to both the Department of Law at the Municipal Attorney's Office and prosecutor. But to the colleagues, I do believe that we may need to act quicker than I do believe the research needs to be done to make sure we're not shooting from the hip and get it wrong, have to come back and keep making sausage. But I think we need something for our community to make sure. I'm talking to some of the officers in the field. They're saying that the $500 ticket thing just doesn't seem to be getting it, and I'm suspecting if it were working, then we wouldn't be seeing the problems that we're seeing. So we're going to.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman. Thank you, Chiefs. We'll keep the meeting moving on.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Honeman, I saw the one guy on television say he didn't care how many times he got transported, he was going to keep using it.
I saw that, Mr. Chairman. He also said he needed treatment. So.
Yeah, well, I don't think he's going to accept treatment here. Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Point of personal privilege.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce an audience, and you can stand up. Renee Proctor, and he likes to go by Proctor. And you're going to be seeing a lot of him because he is doing his social work practicum with me. He'll be hanging out with me for a whole year, like Tricia did last year, but he'll be hanging out with me, spending 15 hours a week, and I just wanted to formally introduce him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Moving down the agenda, we're now down to addendum of the agenda. If I can get somebody to make a motion to approve the addendum in a second.
Move to incorporate the addendum.
Second. Okay, I'll go through it. Item 9D11, under new business, same memorandum, AM 523-2015, change order number 3 to 29M and 0177 to Fleet One LLC for providing fleet fueling cards and billing services to the municipality of Anchorage, various departments, $2,250,000 in the purchasing department. Item 9D12, the same memorandum, AM 524-2015, sole source purchase of consulting services from Resources Data, Inc., RDI, for Municipality of Anchorage MOA, central payroll not to exceed NTE $74,800 for purchasing department. Under ordinances resolution for introduction, we have 9F13 resolution AR 2015-250, resolution appropriating $160,570. Let me get that again. Okay, $161,720 of area-wide general fund 101 and fund balance to the Community Development Department, area-wide general fund 101 as a contribution appropriation, appropriating said contribution along with contributions of $50,000 from the Community Development Department, area-wide general fund 101, $27,000 from the Municipal Managers Department, Transportation Inspection Division, area-wide general fund 101, $7,890 from Public Works Department, area-wide general fund 101, and $7,890 from the Public Works Department, Anchorage Roads and Drainage Service Area Fund 141, all to the Community Development Department, area-wide general capital projects fund 401 for the Hansen system upgrades, electronic plan review system, and related hardware. E-Plan, Community Development Department. Public hearing on this requested is 9/15/2015. There's an accompanying item with it, 9F13A, a memorandum AM 5/25/2015. Dropping down on the addendum, you'll see item 12, appearance request. B, Ron Leva wants to talk to us about regarding SPICE. And there's nothing else. There's no laid on the table items. Is there any objection to the approval of this addendum to the agenda? Madam Clerk, seeing no objection, that is approved. Now, if we get a motion on the consent agenda and a second.
Move to approve.
Is there a second? Second. Okay. We'll now go through for those assembly members who want to pull the items for further discussion. Mr. Hall, sir.
No items to pull, but I want to be added as a co-sponsor with Mr. Evans on 9F10 and 9F11.
I already notified the clerk of that after our previous discussion, sir. So,
Thank you.
Ms. Johnston, ma'am.
No items, but I also would like to be added on as a co-sponsor for 9F10 and 9F11.
Okay. Mr. Starr, sir.
No items.
Mr. Peterson.
No items. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Evans.
No items. No items, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to pull 9 Apple 1. And, Mr. Chairman, I would also like to be added as a co-sponsor 9F9. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Flynn, sir. Thank you. Ms. Dembowski, ma'am. Mr. Steele, sir.
No items.
Mr. Honeman.
On the addendum 9 Delta 11 for a question.
So the items that were pulled was item 9A1, item 9D11. So,
Mr. Chairman.
ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to pull item 9D10, but I just want to take a moment and welcome Robert Harris, our new Chief Fiscal Officer for the municipality. We had a confirmation hearing, and it went really well, and I'm going to be really excited to work with him. So welcome, Mr. Harris. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And looking at his resume, ma'am, I'm impressed that he chose to work for this city because he could have worked anywhere. So thanks for coming on board, sir. Please vote. Those items that were approved, that were not pulled for further discussion. We'll go back to the first time that was pulled. 9A1. Ms. Gray Jackson, you pulled that one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move to approve. Mr. Chairman, I'll be
Unanimous
reading.
consent, see no objection. That's approved, ma'am.
I'll be reading, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Ms. Domboski will be presenting, and there's someone
Who is
here.
there? Who's here to get it? Come on down.
Great.
And do you have anybody here to take photos?
Yes, we do.
You can come right down front and go that way. You get a better shot. Come on down.
Right.
I did. I asked unanimous consent.
A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly.
No, come on down here. And Amy, move her over. Now you get the full photo.
Let me know when you're finished.
Okay. Okay.
There you go.
Yes, there we go.
Ready? A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing August 26, 2015 as Women's Equality Day. Whereas in 1971, the U.S. Congress designated every August 26 as Women's Equality Day, thus commemorating the 1920 passage of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, granting women the right to vote. And whereas equal participation at the ballot box was the culmination of decades spent organizing, protesting, and advocating for women's rights. And whereas the passage of the 19th Amendment has paved the way for women to participate as volunteers, voters, candidates, and leaders in our democracy. And whereas, although there have been decades of progress toward gender equality, women nationwide make an average of 77 cents for every dollar paid to men, and here in Alaska, an average income of 67.8 cents to the dollar, which puts us in 48th place in the nation for pay equality. And whereas, in 2014, the YWCA Alaska's Board of Directors passed an expansive resolution to eliminate the gender pay gap in the state of Alaska by 2025, and whereas YWCA Alaska will honor Women's Equality Day by presenting the Gender Pay Equality Initiative Year 1 report on August 26, 2015 from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. at their offices located at 324 East 5th Avenue in Anchorage. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly resolves to join in recognizing Women's Equality Day and invites residents to attend the presentation and learn about the progress being made and be part of changing history for Alaska women. Passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 25th day of August, 2015.
On behalf of the YWCA of Alaska, I would like to thank all of you for your support. And as the resolution says, we would like to encourage everyone to join us tomorrow evening to learn more about our work to close the gender pay gap in Alaska at our one-year report on the initiative at 4 p.m. So thank you very much.
Could we get your name for the record, ma'am?
Yes, Tamaya Liebersbach, and I am the coordinator for economic empowerment at the Y.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item that was pulled for further discussion is on the addendum agenda, item 9D11, the same memorandum, AM 523-2015, change order number 3 to 29M0177 to Fleet One LLC for providing fleet fuel service refueling cards, fleet fueling cards and billing services to the municipality of Anchorage, various departments, $2,250,000, the purchasing department. Mr. Honeman, you pulled that, so I need a motion.
Move to approve or accept.
Second.
Mr. Honeman.
Just making note here, and I think I answered part of my question, which is we're paying $2.25 million a year for essentially a credit card for fuel purchases. Is that correct, Mr. Abbott or Ms.?
Mr. Abbott?
Mr. Honeman, through the chair, no, this is just not credit cards. This is actually the purchase of the fuel.
So it does provide for the fuel for our fleet?
Yes, it does, sir.
Okay, that was my first question. I thought it was just strictly for the use of the credit card, the billing and accounting. But
No,
is that roughly what we're paying for fuel for the majority of our fleet?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Don't know the question. Asking unanimous consent from the body. She no objection, Madam Clerk, and the minutes reflect that was approved. Since it's not 6 o'clock, we can't take appearance requests yet. We're going to drop down to item 11A, B, and C. Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This is an old business, unfinished action.
Right. I'd like to move to postpone indefinitely 11A, AM 4/20/2015.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Do you want to discuss why, ma'am?
Well,
At the request of the administration, we're going to postpone this indefinitely until they made the decision from the board that's looking at it now, and then it'll be back in front of us if that's the way they decide to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Is there any objection to approval of that item being postponed indefinitely? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk, that item is postponed indefinitely. Now 11B, which is same memorandum AM 421-2015, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move to postpone indefinitely AM 421-2015
For the same reason?
for the same reason.
Is there a second?
Second.
First and second, ask unanimous consent of the Assembly on this item. Seeing no objection, Madam Clerk, that item is postponed indefinitely. Ms. Gray Jackson, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 11C, AM 494-2015, Office Cocktail Lounge, move to postpone indefinitely.
Second.
That's LLC 8006.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
And we're moving to postpone indefinitely. I believe it's at the request of the Office Cocktail Lounge.
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ask unanimous consent. See no objection, item is postponed indefinitely. Thank you. We are now a little ahead of schedule, so we're going to take about a 15-minute break because we can't take persons to be heard until 6. Yeah, why don't we? Let's go take our dinner break now, and then we come back. We're going to take executive session, but let's go have the dinner now, and we come back. We'll take persons to be heard, then we'll do executives. Okay? Let's do it that way. Yeah, we're going to have to make that motion, but what I want to do is let me have a dinner break now. You want to make the motion? Mr. Starr, we're going to change. Could you come back? I'm sorry. Could you come back just a minute? Mr. Hall, Ms. Johnston, since we have an executive session we've got to do, we're just going to combine all of it. Mr. Flynn, you want to make the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, I move to meet in executive session to discuss the status, issues, and strategy of municipalities pending legal matter before the state's Office of Administrative Hearings involving Spirits of Alaska, a matter which involves confidential attorney-client communications that may result in additional litigation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Ask unanimous consent. See no objection. We're going to go have dinner and go to executive session. We'll be back when that's done. Okay. We're now down on the agenda item 6A. Let's see. No, we're not. I'll get it yet. We're now down to item 12A, Representative Harriet Drummond and Senator Johnny Ellis regarding legislative citation. If you want to come forward, welcome to the body again. I think you used to serve here, didn't you?
Yeah,
Before you moved on to bigger and better things.
It was a little while ago. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the welcome, and I will not take up a lot of your time tonight. I just wanted to come and award a legislative citation to Miss Amanda Mosier. The legislature took note of the fact that Amanda won the top 40 under 40 recognition this year, and it allowed me to reflect on working with her during my 5 years on the Assembly. And you have an awesome public servant in this young lady. And she well deserves this, and I just wanted to make sure that the community knows that you have an incredibly capable and confident young woman here working for you, and that she deserves every bit of this.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's good to see you.
Okay. Well, let's let them take pictures of us like this. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. They gave us a whole bunch of. Okay, hold on. They always give you about 4 to 5 extra copies.
Amanda, speech.
Thank you very much.
Well, we have questions, ma'am.
That's a good way to return, Ms. Drummond.
Questions from Assembly members? I guess you're going to have to answer questions then. Amanda, congratulations. You so richly deserve this.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for all you do. Ron Oliva is the next person to talk to us Under persons behind, is Ron here? Ron? Oh, Ron Leva. That's unlike him.
Mr. Chairman?
Well, if he's here by 6:30, we'll deal with it. Yes, Mr. Flynn.
We need to make a motion.
Yes, you do, sir.
Yeah. Those who were here before the break know we just had an executive session. I moved the tapes of the executive session may be released for public access only after all the causes of action related to the specific litigation have been resolved by final judgment or when further claims arising from the matter are otherwise barred.
Is there a
Second. Second.
Ask unanimous. That is approved unanimously, Madam Clerk. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Next item in front of us is item 14A, Resolution AR 2015-232, resolution approving a letter agreement between the Municipality of Anchorage and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 1547 IBW, to allow for more flexibility in certain scheduling of MLNP generation personnel from Employee Relations Department. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anybody wishing to testify, please come forward. Spell your last name for the record. Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing public testimony is closed. What's the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Discussion from assembly members. Say none. Please vote. That's approved unanimously. Next item in front is item 14B, Ordinance AO 2015-92, an ordinance authorizing disposal by perpetual conservation easement on a heritage land bank. It shall be parcel 6-251 located in Girdwood. Legally describes a portion of SW4 Section 3 T10N R2W. Thank you, ma'am. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anybody wish to testify? Please come forward. Spell your name clearly for the record. Anyone at all? Hearing say no, and public testimony is closed.
Second.
Moved and approved. Mr. Starr, sir.
Well, just a shout out actually to the process of alerting us in particular. I think we're now part of the email exchange that talks about do we have a vested interest in the properties being discussed. So the HLB, Discussion Real Estate Services, sending that out to us allows us a little more focus. So thanks for that. It allows us to educate ourselves by reaching out to the community first. So that's partly here. There's others that we're seeing come through, but I want to put the comments on the record to keep that up. Thank you.
Right, Mr. Starr. It's been good to see this come forward so we know what's happening. Thank you, Mr. Starr, for pointing that out to us. Any other discussion from assembly members? Seeing none, please vote. Item was approved unanimously. Next item in front of us, item 14C, Resolution 2015-236, resolution of the Municipality of Anchorage appropriating $156,764 from the Anchorage Roads and Drainage Service Area Arts Operating Fund 141.
Waive reading.
Thank you. This is for flooding glaciation and drainage matching program. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anybody wishing to testify, please come forward. Spell your last name, if you would, please. Hearing and seeing no public testimony is closed. What's the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Moved and seconded. Discussion from assembly members. Ms. Dembowski, ma'am.
Not on this item.
Okay.
Right after you're done. I just want to point a moment of personal privilege.
Okay. Please vote.
I hit my button too fast, Dick. I was trying not to.
What? That item is approved by the body. Ms. Dembowski, ma'am, moment of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, earlier in our agenda, we missed, there are some high school students in the audience, and I won't, I'm not afraid to brag. They're from the best high school in the municipality. Oh, Eagle River's going to get
You mean,
get
is that
to
south or east or west or where?
Chuyak, my alma mater.
Okay.
So if we could get them to come down and just introduce themselves. And
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And if you're embarrassed on doing it, blame her.
All
Come on
three of
down.
you guys, come on down. I see you back there.
Oh, come on.
You can't hide.
I'm not doing this alone.
Tell us what grade you're in.
And your name?
Your name?
Do you want to go first? My name is Briston, and I'm a senior at Chugiak. I'm Hannah, and I'm a senior at Chugiak. I'm Shelby, and I'm a senior at Chugiak. I'm Tess, and I'm a junior at Chugiak.
I'm Ethan, and I'm a senior at Chugiak.
It's a great school. It's good to have you here. And if you need anything signed by us, we're more than happy to. Normally, they have a little sheet for us to sign. Did your teachers give you one?
Yes.
You got them signed? If you don't, just come on up and we'll sign them for you. But thanks for being here.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Gray Jackson?
I need to tag on to Ms. Domboski's point of personal privilege because there are 2 students back there, and I signed their paperwork, and I'd like for them to come up.
Okay.
Thank you,
Anything
Ms.
else,
Domboski.
Mr.
Thank you,
Domboski?
Mr. Chairman.
No, sir, I was just proud to see my stayings here in force.
Thank you very much for being here.
While we wait for
So which students do we have that LB's outing you? Tell us your name, if you would, please, and what school you go to.
I'm Royal Sophia Simone from West.
I'm Maya Galley, and I'm from West.
Now we're talking. Great game Friday night, by the way.
Any questions? Any questions from Assembly members? Welcome to the meeting. Thanks for being here. That was an amazing game, wasn't it?
Only if you were from West, which I am.
We're on 14D, yes. Next item is item 14D, ordinance 2015-93, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly, amending Anchorage Municipal Code, subsection 10.50.035D to extend sunset of the bar safety hour permit program from August 31st, 2015 to August 31st, 2016. Absent other further action by the Assembly. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anybody wishing to testify, please come forward. Spell your last name for the record, if you would, please.
Good evening. My name is Sylvia Villamides. I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a cold. I am the director of the Alaska Hospitality Retailers, and I believe you should have attached to your a letter that we wrote in regards to this particular program. I know that this program has not been as active as we thought it was going to be when we asked for you guys to support it. However, I was notified this morning that there's actually now 5 bars being included in the program. Also, just as a reminder that the restaurant designated permits, whichever beverage dispensary license has a restaurant designated permit, they do not need to apply for this particular permit to the municipality for the program. And there is 50 plus of those in our city. This program is important because we believe that one patron that can stay behind waiting for that safe ride home, it could probably save that person's life or maybe from getting violated or who knows what may happen. So I would really hope that you consider extending this program for another year. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Question from Assembly members? Don't appear any. Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else wishing to testify on this issue, please come forward. Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing no one?
Move to
Wish
approve.
the body.
Move to approve.
Move to second, Mr. Flynn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll vote to extend this another year. And Sylvia, appreciate you coming down to speak to it. And I know you reached out to several of us on this issue. I'd appreciate it if we had a more robust program, and that's something we can't do from here. We need the industry to step up and take this opportunity that we're granting a little more seriously, frankly. I think there is merit to it, but unless we start seeing, I struggle with the idea of extending it, given that I know it causes our clerk staff extra work, but without much effect because only 1 or 2 or 3 establishments take advantage of it. So I guess I'd like to see a little more industry effort on this if we're going to extend it yet again next year. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Honeman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I know you and I had done some work with this earlier with the industry a couple of years back, and this was one of the ideas that came from within our constituency and the bar owners and such. And so I do recognize Mr. Flynn's concerns and echo the sentiment, but I do thank Ms. Vilmedius for being here with my HR and representing the folks. And I appreciate you explaining the restaurant designation. Businesses don't necessarily need this, and that many of them actually do stay open beyond the serving hours for their patrons for food and things like that, so that they can meet their obligations. So I would say we need to perhaps do just a bit better job of getting the information out there, and I'll take that mission on from the public safety position and perhaps espouse it a little tighter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman. There's no other discussion from assembly members. Please vote. That's approved unanimously. Thank you for your coming down here and testifying. We appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move to take up items 14E, F, G, H, and J. And to have a combined public hearing on these items, sir.
I don't think you can do E.
I'm pretty sure he has nothing to do with that.
Well, I'd like to have it anyway. Just kidding. No, just
Why don't
kidding.
you let us deal with E, and then I'll call on you to make the motion for the rest of it.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. F, G, H, and J.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Is there a
Chairman.
second? We'll
Second.
take this up after
Second.
we do E, but
H and I.
it's going to be 14F, 14G, 14H, and 14I. Combined public hearing, combining them.
I'm sorry.
Who was the second on that?
I was.
Mr. Honeman was. Is there any objection from the body? See no objection. When we get down to that item after something is 14E, we'll deal with it.
Ms. Gray Jackson, what did you do before the meeting? Just kidding. Just kidding. Totally
Okay.
joking.
The next item in front of us is item 14E. Ordinance AO 2015-1-91, ordinance of the Anchorage Assembly amending titles 19 and 14 to allow administrative hearing officers upon referral from the Assembly to conduct public hearings on the assessment rolls for special assessment districts and to render written findings and recommendations to the Assembly for approval, and to make additions and technical corrections in Anchorage Municipal Code, Chapter 19.20. It's brought forward to us by Mr. Flynn. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anybody wishing to testify, please come forward. State your name, spell your last name for the clerk, please. Don't be a path down here. See no one here. Public hearing is closed. What's the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Mr. Flynn.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm stunned there isn't more public testimony on this subject. I think each of you are familiar with the reason behind this ordinance, and I'll just briefly summarize. If we have special assessments that are challenged by the property owners, this allows us to refer those issues to the administrative hearing officer rather than put ourselves in the position of acting as a quasi-judicial body, which I think is not playing to our strengths. Though I do appreciate. I don't
know. Mr. Dombrowski is planning a legal career on this, I think.
I do appreciate the work that you and Ms. Dombrowski and Mr. Evans did do on the Eberhard matter, but that was what inspired this legislation. Listening to some of the discussion in executive session, I think I may need to broaden this for future opportunities. But it's just a simple housekeeping measure to try and keep ourselves out of making judicial decisions when we should be making legislative ones. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Dombrowski, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Flynn and I have had a couple of discussions about, our processes when moving forward, and there's no question when this body sits as a quasi-judicial body, certain the rules are different, and they have to be treated differently, because anything that we do essentially could be appealed to the court. And one thing I can tell you, all three of us who sat through the many days, the 3 days, I think Mr. Evans, I think there was a day where we were in this chamber for 18 hours or something ridiculous. But the information coming before us was incredibly technical, and it was, I think I can confidently say all three of us kept up to speed and understood it, but it was definitely something out of the norm of everyday legislative business. But we do have to recognize, too, that there are times that we sit as a quasi-judicial body that the public wants to be seen and heard by their elected officials. So I think the balance that Mr. Flynn has struck, where it's an option to use an administrative hearing officer or to be heard by the body, is a good one, because it allows the body and the chair to make that determination in these particular situations on a case-by-case basis. So I appreciate this. I think it's a good start, and I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from assembly members? Normally I don't participate, but Mr. Flynn, thank you for bringing this forward, because quite frankly, I've been on the assembly for a while, and every time we have one of these come forward, we try to figure out, now what do we do? We have Amy with us now, and I'm not sure how long she'll be here, you know. She moved on to other things. But she was so good leading us through the case that we had in front of us. So this will help us if it comes in front of us again, and it will. Matter of time. So please vote on this. That's approved unanimously. Remember, you have till 5 p.m. if you want to change your vote. Sorry, Mr. Flynn. Okay. We're now, due to a motion made by Ms. Gray Jackson, we're now going to open the public hearing on item ordinance 2015-84, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly dealing with prohibiting fraudulent misrepresenting a person's age in order to purchase or obtain marijuana. And item 14G, ordinance AO 2015-85, which adds language regarding marijuana consumption while driving and marijuana inside a vehicle. And 14H, which is 2015-86, ordinance of the Anchorage Assembly, amending Anchorage Municipal Code, Chapter 9.28, to include marijuana offenses of minors to the following. And item 14I, ordinance 2015-87, restricting the personnel cultivation of marijuana. Public hearing these items are now open. You only have to testify once. Please come forward, state your name clearly, and tell us if you're on the state board. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were here.
Hi, I just walked in.
We have the issue in front of us now that you came here to testify. Please come join us.
Can I take a minute to read the latest?
If you'd like to.
Okay.
Does anybody else wish to testify in this item? What? Well, sir, you may be the only game in town.
This is the same stuff, Mr. Schulte, that was discussed at our committee meeting.
Okay, thanks. Well, this microphone is just uncommonly hot right now.
It's live.
It is. That is awesome. It's kind of intimidating. Bruce Schulte with the State's Marijuana Control Board.
Spell your last name for our clerk.
Schulte, S as in Sam, C-H-U-L-T-E.
Okay,
and I'm pleased to say I'm not here to complain about anything tonight, other than just to acknowledge the work that you guys are doing. And I understand, my understanding of these ordinances is that these are largely housekeeping things that mirror, in part, what was in the initiative, possibly what's being done at the state level. I would just echo the sentiment that I've expressed before, which is, I would just encourage the body to keep in mind what is going on at the state level, so that hopefully we have complementary, not overlapping or conflicting rules. Other than that, thanks for all the effort, and I really don't have anything to object to tonight.
We're always glad to see you. Mr. Hall has a question for you, sir. Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually don't have a question, but I do want to thank Mr. Schulte, with the direction that the Marijuana Control Board is going, if you continue the way you are, you're sure going to make our job easy. So I just want you to know how much we appreciate that.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I share that sentiment. I hope we end up in a good spot in November.
Good. Ms. Johnston, ma'am?
Just to add to the comments, down at AML, we had a great presentation from Cynthia Franklin. And we are feeling very comfortable with the work all of you are doing. Thank you.
She and her staff are doing a fantastic job, and I'm particularly enthusiastic about the schedule, the revised schedule for the regulatory process, because it's giving us more time to look at the regs. It's providing greater time for public comment and hitting the deadline that we're bound to. So I'm really excited about that. It's a lot of work yet to be done, and we've received a lot of input. I think there was some input from the City of Anchorage on one of the articles that we went over last time, and I imagine there'll be more. Since I haven't contributed to that body of input, I don't know what's coming down the pike, but it is very helpful. So to those who are providing those comments, thank you, and please keep it coming.
Thank you. Mr. Starr, sir.
Well, thanks, Mr. Schulte, for engaging. Hopefully you can bring the uniformity between the state and what's happening throughout the state into our largest city here, so there's uniformity and understanding as those that would travel into Anchorage that, we're somewhat regulated, somewhat, should other municipalities choose not to regulate, hopefully that conversation is had in an appropriate manner, so we're not looking at regulations that are hard to understand when you travel to Anchorage.
Sure. Yeah.
So one of the concepts that we just are talking about now is regulating why, in this case, driving a vehicle or a car or truck or something, or RV specified on that, but it doesn't steer towards operating motorized equipment. Perhaps an experiment would be out for your behalf or research to look at the operating of boats and ATVs, motorhomes, speak to going up to the Arctic Man, and apparently there's citations given for consumption of alcohol and riding a snowmobile, for example. So if there's a way to revisit the operation of motor vehicles in uniformity to what the state's doing throughout, I'd be happy to have that. Is there an amendment later to this action? Because I think there are plenty of instances where folks are endangering others, and if marijuana consumption in driving a boat does it, or a snowmobile or an ATV, we probably ought to look at expanding that, because it doesn't do that tonight.
Sure. Through the chair, Mr. Starr, yeah, that's a really good point, and I'm hoping that over the coming years, as we see more research nationally, there'll be more objective criteria against which to evaluate those cases. But yeah, I agree that I'd be the first one to say, hey, look, don't consume anything and operate any sort of equipment, and that's definitely a message that
I didn't say it very well, but hopefully we don't tread on policies and programs that others in the state are doing or not doing. In this case, I know Big Lake and Wasilla treat ATVs differently than we do. I don't know if consumption of alcohol is different than that. Same with commercial boating versus recreational boating. The regulatory environment in commercial boats is different for consumption of alcohol than recreational boats. So perhaps do some study on independence on that. And
okay.
Thank you.
Good suggestion. Yeah, thank you.
There don't appear any other questions. Thanks for being here, sir.
Thank you for your time.
Anybody else wish to address us on these marijuana issues, these four of them? We've got the hearing combined. Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony is closed. I want to take each issue up individually. I need a motion on 14F Ordinance AO 2015-84.
Move approval.
Second.
Mr. Hall.
Yes, Mr. Trini. These are items that brought to us from the legal department, and basically they're mandated with the statutes that were passed for the proposition legalizing, or the initiative legalizing marijuana. So we will continue over the course of time to make sure that we stay ahead of the curve and get our codes up to comply with that ordinance. And that's what all of these items are doing, and I really would ask for support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Honeman, on the issue in front of us.
And, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make this kind of a blanket comment from the Public Safety Committee's meeting, the most recent, a review of all four of these ordinances. The same information applies. And so we did have a meeting and addressed Ms. Senecathino, I believe, was here earlier. She may or may not still be here. There she is. Came and gave a presentation, and I think if there's any questions, Ms. Thino is very learned on these 4 ordinances and can give a very short summary answer to any concerns you may have on any of these ordinances. However, saying that, the committee as a whole had no objections to any of these ordinances as they are written. There may be the need to make further amendments down the road, but to get these to enact these ordinances tonight can get us, if you will, down the road, I think fairly prudently dealing with marijuana. Further, we did invite the Alcohol Beverage Control Board Director, Ms. Cynthia Franklin, formerly our municipal prosecutor, and her role, if you will, on the ABC board on the marijuana side. She did not take an official position on our ordinances. However, she did review them and found them to be in good legal standing as far as there's some good basis for them. Again, gave the caveat that there may be necessity with regulations coming down the road from the state level that we may need to make some adjustments to our ordinances. So, again, no objections to these ordinances as written.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Ms. Dembowski on your ordinance, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just will echo what Mr. Hall's sentiment. You know, this was brought before the Marijuana Committee of the Assembly by the Law Department. And essentially, for those that are watching or in the audience, this first ordinance, essentially what it does is it parrots the ballot language and it brings into a municipal code that it's basically illegal to fraudulently misrepresent your age in order to buy marijuana, because by ballot initiative, you have to be 21 years old. So just like if you have a fake ID and you go to try to buy alcohol, you're not supposed to do it, it's prohibited, this will be too. So just a quick little explanation for the audience. I urge approval.
Mr. Hall, the ordinance in front of us, which is your ordinance, sir. Anything else?
No, I just want to assure the body that we are staying on top of this. Mr. Horniman, we're well aware that it may be necessary for us to come back and amend some of these, depending on what the state does once the legislative session comes back in session. As we all know, they took no action on Senate Bill 31, which was basically their attempt at going through and cleaning up state statutes. So I'm sure once they come back in session, there's going to be some necessity on our part to make sure that we're in compliance. So we are, when I say we've got an outstanding legal department. They're tracing this stuff every day.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Before we vote on this, I want to just tell you how much I appreciate your service to this assembly and the citizens of this town as head of our committee dealing with this. Thanks for bringing this forward, sir. Please vote. Item is approved by the body. Voting was unanimous. Next item in front is item 14G, ordinance 2015-85. We'll need this one. An ordinance of the Anchorage Assembly amending Anchorage Municipal Code Section 9.36.200 to add language regarding marijuana consumption while driving and marijuana inside a vehicle. Mr. Hall.
Move approval.
Second.
Ms. Dembowski. Okay. Ms. Dembowski, you're first in line, ma'am.
Thank you. Again, I will do this with each one of these ordinances just to give some clarity. So this ordinance will amend Anchorage Municipal Code to add language regarding consumption of marijuana while driving and inside a vehicle. I believe this creates parity with existing alcohol law, but because marijuana obviously will be packaged differently, simply leaving the term open container undefined would lead to the interpretation of that up to each officer. So the recommendation from the Department of Law was to create uniformity and certainty for the public. The decision was made to simply prohibit marijuana from being in certain areas of the vehicle. The Department of Law believes that this will allow for proper notice to citizens and is what is prohibited and allow for uniformity and enforcement. So essentially, let's just say you have obviously a container of alcohol. It's going to be packaged much differently than marijuana. You might have loose leaf packets, you might have a candy bar, you might have this, you might have that. You can't consume while you're driving. And if you're the driver, obviously you can't have it in your possession where you can take a hit as you're driving. Does that make sense? I think it does. So I appreciate the Department of Law bringing this forward. Seneca, I hope I did that justice. I may not have, but I hope I did. There might be some discussion. Earlier today, I did call the Department of Law just for clarity because I got a question from the public. And the question was this: if I am somebody who picks up 6 of my kids' friends, and I'm driving down the road and I get pulled over, if somebody has marijuana in their pocket, am I going to, as the driver, get nicked for that? And the answer that was given to me by the Department of Law today was no, because the driver has to know the marijuana was in the kid's pocket. Now, if you roll up on a car and they roll the windows down and smoke is billowing out, I would say there's probably probable cause that the driver knew. So those of you who are a little bit afraid of, well, what does that mean if it's in this part of the car or that part of the car, there has to be knowledge on the part of the driver in order to be considered having possession, having an open container. Does that sound about right, Seneca?
Yes, through the chair, I would say that's a fairly accurate representation of how we perceive this would be applied, yes.
Okay, thank you. So out of all the introductions of this particular ordinance, that's the one concern that I had heard. And again, the intent of the campaign was to regulate and tax marijuana like alcohol. So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to create parity between our alcohol codes and now our marijuana codes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. There are no other assembly comments. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some amendments I would like to introduce. Amendment number 1 starts with, on page 1, lines 28, 29. You should all have copies of these. They were passed out before the meeting started.
Let's see.
So I move amendment number 1.
Second. Can you read your amendment to us?
Certainly. On page 1, lines 28 and 29, delete all content and replace with, whereas the Alaska Marijuana Control Board has proposed regulations to require all marijuana projects purchased at retail establishments to be sold in sealed packaging, and this provision has not drawn any significant opposition.
Okay, thank you. Who seconded that? I did. Okay. On your amendment, Mr. Peterson, do you want to discuss it?
Certainly. And I was just reading through the ordinance, and these changes help the ordinance meet its stated goal of regulating marijuana like alcohol. The Marijuana Control Board is proposing to require all marijuana sold in retail stores to be sold in sealed packaging, and this amendment would define an open container of marijuana as any marijuana with this not in unopened sealed packaging. Under this original version of this ordinance, marijuana and alcohol would be regulated substantially differently because sealed containers of alcohol would not be subject to this ordinance, while sealed containers of marijuana would be. This amendment corrects that discrepancy while still providing protections against the use of marijuana in the motor vehicle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will do this with every one of these amendments, so I don't have to jump in queue, but I would like the Department of Law to weigh in on each one of these proposed amendments for Mr. Peterson.
Department of Law, please.
Through the chair, a few notes I would make about this particular amendment and the whereas section. It is true that the Marijuana Control Board...
Ma'am, we can't hear you. Can you speak in your microphone? I'm sorry.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Sorry about that. It is true that the Marijuana Control Board has a set of draft regulations that are addressing packaging. I will note that the comment period on that is not going to close until September 10th, so whether there's opposition to that or not, I think is yet to be seen. In terms of going down the list here, I think the primary question the Department of Law has about the phrase sealed or unsealed is, what does that mean? If marijuana is packaged in a plastic baggie and it is closed, does that mean it is sealed or unsealed? And that is the primary problem that other states have run into, and that is precisely why we attempted to regulate it in the way that was proposed here, so that there is absolute clarity about something that's so that there is not a lack of clarity about something being sealed or unsealed. Those are primary comments on this particular amendment.
Mr. Dombowski, anything else? I know, Paul, I'm going to get to you next. Here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the cautions that I always throw out there is drafting legislation on something that's proposed versus enacted. So we have no idea really because they're not done their process yet. As Seneca indicated, the comments period is still open. So I am content with the way that the Department of Law has drafted this thus far. So unless it's a technical edit, I won't be supporting these amendments simply because I don't think I want to predicate our law on something that maybe might be. So I think we're going to see this throughout, and we've had these discussions multiple times throughout this process. As we pass something, if the state comes back next year and passes something different, or the control board comes out and passes something different, we're going to have to update and amend our laws to match to make sure that we're in parity with the state. But frankly, we're kind of the ones at the forefront right now. We're kind of the bushwhackers out there. You know, we're blazing the trail. And I think this is a solid start. And I think when you have something like this, the least amount of ambiguity or variables that we have out there that aren't really solidified, I think the better. And I think what's currently before us is a pretty solid starting point.
Thank you. Mr. Honeman on the amendment. Mr. Peterson.
And I think that both Ms. Lino and Mr. Domboski have covered the majority of the finer points. Just wanted to point out that that it's not, you know, you're talking on your ordinance, Mr. Peterson, specifically your amendment is talking about products purchased at retail establishments. I'm talking about people who grow their own, package their own, much like some people have a flask for alcohol, bottle their own beer or wine. So, you know, I think that it's very clear under the proposed ordinance as written, whereas if you were to replace that, it really does lose that particular section of people who have their own personal use, personal possession.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman. Mr. Hall on the amendment in front of us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. When Cindy addressed us at the AML, she started out by making it very clear, you understand that if we don't get our job done, they're going to be knocking on your door. So several meetings back, before the Marijuana Control Board had ever been appointed, it was the consensus of the committee that we proceed as if the state's not going to be prepared to issue license or have regulations or anything else in place. So that was the direction that we gave all of our departments, is to go do this job as if we're going to be issuing the license ourselves within the community. I've got a real comfort level at this point in time. The Marijuana Control Board's going to have their job done, but everybody understands when they get done, it's got to go to the legislature and to the governor. They're not going to go into session until the middle of January. February 24th, these people have the right to go apply for a license. If they're not ready in Juneau, they're going to come to us in Anchorage. So I think it's imperative that we take the approach that we're taking, and we're doing it with a clear understanding that we're probably going to have to go back and do some amendments here in the future, and hopefully we do have to do that. It's going to be a whole lot easier to manage this new industry in our state if we're doing it at a state level of regulation. But if not, we've got to be ready in our community. And Mr. Horniman made the very valid point, is that it's going to be legal for individuals to grow their own marijuana, and that's a totally different deal. That's not going to come sealed the way that it will out of a retail. So I think the legal department is proceeding in precisely the direction that they were given by the committee, asking to make sure that we're prepared for whatever scenario occurs on February the 24th. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no one else in the queue. We're going to bring up the voting on this. Please understand you'll be voting on the amendment offered by Mr. Peterson. Please vote. That amendment fails 2-9 against it. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll call this next one Amendment Number 2, and it starts on page 2, line 25.
Mr. Chairman?
Page 2, line 22, I think.
I think he means line 43, if you look closely at the legislation. It's an E and an F to paragraph B2, and that would fall after paragraph D, which runs from lines 39 to 42.
Mr. Peterson?
Mr. Flynn, but it starts on line 20, actually 25 or 26, I can't tell. But this would be adding an E and F to number 2 on page 2.
So it would come after D, then you want to add E and F?
Yes.
It'd be 40. So you want to start on line 43. It's a technical.
43, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. What do you want it to read, Mr. Peterson?
Following the word persons, or, and then number E would be in a closed glove compartment or console of the vehicle, or in a backpack, purse, shoulder bag, fanny pack, or similar item that is not readily accessible to the driver while operating the vehicle. Number F would be in any other location that is not visible to another vehicle on the road or street, or to a pedestrian walking near the street or road, and is not accessible to the driver while operating the vehicle. And the explanation for this amendment is it helps the ordinance meet the purpose of protecting the public from marijuana and alcohol use in moving vehicles, while protecting people who would be making good faith efforts to comply with the spirit of the law.
Is there a second to that amendment?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
This amendment would not make it illegal to store an open container in places where it would be concealed from the public view while not being accessible to the driver.
Is that all, sir?
That's it.
Ms. Dombrowski on the amendment in front of us?
Yes, through the chair. Department of Law opinion, please.
Yes, through the chair, I'll mention first as an introduction that these amendments would apply both to open containers of alcohol and to marijuana. So the effective E would, for instance, be to permit an open container of alcohol to be placed in a closed glove compartment. I'll pass it over to Prosecutor Thino for some additional commentary.
Go ahead, ma'am.
I think through the chair, one of the concerns here is that by expanding this ordinance and the areas in which you can possess an open container of alcohol or marijuana in the vehicle, we're actually expanding beyond the scope of the similar state statute. We are concerned that we would be then frustrating the practice or the policy of the state statute by allowing both alcohol and marijuana in places that the state is attempting to prohibit it, specifically closed compartments, consoles, so on and so forth. And I would note, as to subsection E, all of these kinds of places, the glove compartment, the console, purses, under search and seizure law are considered areas immediately accessible to a driver. So this would be actually inconsistent in a philosophical sense with the way that search law is interpreted. Thank you.
Mr. Dombrowski, anything else, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair to the Department of Law, it's my understanding then, as I see this, if my basic understanding is we can pass laws that are more restrictive but not less restrictive than the state of Alaska, correct?
Through the chair, we cannot pass laws that frustrate the policy or the intent of the state law, and so if this were interpreted to be such, it would be invalid.
And what I'm hearing from the Department of Law is there is that concern.
Through the chair, that is correct.
All right. Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand the intent of what Mr. Peterson's trying to do, and I think in the example that I gave in the very beginning, it probably is coming from the same place, is what is really considered in the possession. Is it a passenger or what? But I think the explanation that's been given by the Department of Law makes it pretty clear that, again, if we adopt this amendment, it kind of muddles a very solid ordinance that's in front of us. So therefore, I will be opposing this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Hall, sir.
Yes, I will oppose this as well, but the chief can address it much better than I can. Chief Mew, would you please come address this particular amendment?
Welcome, Chief.
Mr. Trainee, Mr. Hall. Yeah, I think from the standpoint, can you hear me all right? Is that too close?
We can
Not
hear
far
you
enough?
fine.
Okay. I'm not sure what we're trying to accomplish here. It seems that it's simple enough that if you have the kind of container that isn't sealed where it's with alcohol containers, they either have a hard alcohol, they have a seal on it, you can't reseal it. Same with wine. Once you pull the cork, pull the wax off it, you can't, or twist the thing, you can't reseal it, and so that's open at that point. Same with beer. Until they invent that technology for marijuana packaging, we don't have that kind of a seal. They may have packaging like home brew or something like that in a bottle that it never did get really sealed. And the notion is that stuff goes in the trunk today or behind the last seat in the SUV. I don't see a reason why we would want that stuff in the glove box or sitting around the passenger compartment where it's very easy to get at it and just hide it real quick when you see you're getting pulled over. I think both unsealed marijuana and unsealed alcohol need to be kept the same way, and that's in the trunk or behind the back seat. I think that's a concept everybody already is pretty comfortable with, and it makes it, I don't know why we're carving out an exception for marijuana to have that more accessible than alcohol when the containers are unsealed. Am I getting to the answer your question there?
Yes, thank you, Chief.
Anything else, Mr. Hall?
No, thank you.
Mr. Peterson, anything for the chief?
No, nothing for the chief.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to say the reason that I decided to write up this amendment was because I was contacted by a citizen who said they didn't think it made a whole lot of sense to put something in the trunk of their car that was going to freeze 4 or 5 months out of the year. And so I was trying to find somewhere within the vehicle where it wasn't accessible so that they could have the product so it wouldn't be frozen.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
My intent.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments from assembly members? Mr. Honeman?
Just like to urge my colleague, and of course I appreciate where you're coming from for the intent, but that the ordinances that we see before us, again, went through the committee. We did not have your amendments as proposed to have discussion with an opportunity with Department of Law, and that in and of itself is kind of catching us all off guard. So as far as someone concerned about alcohol and freezing, it doesn't generally. You can put vodka and such in hard liquor anyway in the perhaps maybe beer with water content, but you can put vodka and hard liquor in the freezer. And then marijuana doesn't seem to get affected by cold weather.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman. Discussion from assembly members. Seeing none, please vote on the amendment. Offered by Mr. Peterson. The amendment is not approved. We have AO 2015-85 in front of us. Any other amendments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Amendment number 3 would start on page 3, line 1.
Let me get there. Sorry. Page 3, line 1. Okay. Would be section 2 you want to amend?
We're actually adding a different section.
Okay. What do you want it to read?
This says, section 2, it is the intent of the Assembly to, if reasonably possible, have the laws of the municipality, the state of Alaska, and neighboring municipalities have consistent laws regarding open containers of marijuana in motor vehicles. Should the state of Alaska or a neighboring municipality adopt laws on the subject that differ from the laws of the municipality, it is in the intention of the Assembly to examine whether changes to municipal law are appropriate. And then,
is there a second? Motion and a second on that. You want to discuss that with Mr. Peterson? Discuss that item with us any further?
Yes, sir.
Anything else, Mr. Peterson? Okay. Ms. Dombrowski, on the amendment offered in front of us?
Sure. I'm fine with intent language generally. My concern is this amendment essentially takes out the effective date. Our current Section 2 says the amendment to this ordinance shall be effective 30 days after passage and approval by the Assembly. So it takes out the effective date. But second to that, my question is, again, I want the Department of Law's opinion, but would this be more appropriate in the whereas section?
Through the chair, enacting a statement of intent such as this would be something of a rare and slightly unusual move for our municipal code. It certainly could be moved into a whereas clause. I would also add, as I read the written amendment, the intent was to renumber the effective date section to be a new section 3.
Correct.
Okay. So do you have any other comments on the particular section? I don't think this is necessarily in conflict with what we've been saying. I think I probably would be a little more comfortable with it being in the whereas section, you know, the setup, saying we're signaling the intent that, of course, as state law changes, we will change as we need to and reevaluate our code. Does the Department of Law have any problems with that?
Through the chair, no.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I move to amend Mr. Peterson's amendment, and I would take out, let me just tell you where I'd put it. I'm not really sure where on the first page.
Do you want to take a couple of minutes? Because trying to do this on the fly, sometimes we end up with strange things.
Okay, can I
We've
consult
got
with it?
time.
Can I
Let's
consult with this Assembly Council real quick?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's take a 5-minute at ease so she can work on this, because I get worried when we start doing it on the fly. Reached. I haven't seen smoke signals coming up yet. Mr. Levis not here. Where were you at 6 o'clock to 6:30, sir? You what? Oh, no. I approved it as soon as I saw your name on it.
Mr. Chairman, let's just move them to the end of the agenda. I think we should stay with legislation, and that would be my
I think I agree
recommendation.
with him, Ron. It'll be easier for you.
It won't be long, Mr. Oliva.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we take up item 14H.
Second.
We'll come back. We're going to take up item 14H. We have a motion to take up item 14H. We can come back and take up this one again. We already had the hearing on it. So
Move to approve.
The question is move to approve 2015-86. You moved it, Mr. Honeman. Is there a second? Okay. We're discussing this item now. Discussion from members on 14H. Mr. Evans.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I, in reading this, I just had some confusion as to how this would actually be implemented, and perhaps the members of the committee that looked at this could enlighten me on that. The concern I have is simply because, as I understand it, and it's by no means scientific, THC and other cannabinoids show up in the bloodstream for like 6 weeks. And this seems to indicate that if there's any amount shown in the bloodstream, the minor can't be driving. I was just curious as to whether there was going to be a cutoff limit imposed on this, or basically any amount would trigger this. And then the second part is that, you know, one of the penalties is that the minor can't drive for 24 hours after having been detected of having THC in the bloodstream. But I didn't understand that, because 24 hours later, the THC would still be in the bloodstream. So I just don't get the implementation, and I would appreciate enlightenment.
Legal?
Through the chair, I would specify that active THC, that is the impairing substance, which is the substance that we test for through blood at the Washington State Crime Lab, that is the substance that remains in the blood for a matter of hours, usually 2, although there can be small amounts of THC detected up to about 6 hours. The length of time you're referring to is the carboxy THC, or the metabolites of the active substance. That is what's detected for days, weeks, or sometimes months. That is not what we test for, and that is not what would be covered by this ordinance.
Mr. Evans?
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. I don't know that it needs to be clarified in the ordinance or not, but that satisfied my concern.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Honeman, on the issue in front of us.
That was what I was going to do, is refer to Ms. Atheno on that. But I do understand that there are, and Ms. Atheno, you may just briefly explain that there are programs, companies that are actually testing products that can be used for a saliva test that can actually look for active THC. Is that right, Ms. Atheno?
Through the chair, that is correct. The saliva test as well tests for the active component of THC, which lasts in the system for only a few hours.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman. Mr. Flynn, on the issue in front of us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pretty good at reading comprehension, but I don't see the part where it distinguishes between active THC and some other version. I forget the term you used. Where is that?
Through the chair, I'll enlist Seneca to offer her thoughts on this as well, but in each of the sections, chemical test is defined as a test of a bodily sample for the presence of an impairing substance. I think that may at least get you to a question over whether the inactive form is an impairing substance.
Ma'am?
Sure, and to specify, Mr. Falsey is referring to, for example, subsection F.
Could I ask you to speak in the microphone again?
Excuse me,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Falsey is referring to subsection F, where the phrase chemical test is defined. And again, he's correct that that phrase impairing substance would refer to the active component of THC.
Mr. Flynn?
I think Mr. Evans was onto something here. The presence of an impairing substance, I don't see how that distinguishes between active and inactive. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm not I skipped law school.
Through the chair, that's okay. The metabolite of marijuana, the carboxy-THC, is by definition not impairing. So the only impairing substance in connection with marijuana is going to be the active component or the actual THC, which is what these tests are looking for and what our chemical tests are by definition referring to.
Mr. Flynn, anything else for her? Okay. Mr. Starr, sir? On 86 in front of us?
Yes. Does the premise on the need to do a chemical test, is it prefaced by sort of a roadside observation by the police officer, or in the same vein of sort of, you know, touch your nose and walk the line and all of that? Does that all happen first before we decide to do a chemical test?
Correct. So the officer is making observations that believes there's an impairing substance on board, and the testing is to confirm that observation.
So the legislation that authorizes the officer to proceed to the request for, you know, alcohol, it's a breathalyzer. In the case of a chemical test, is there a roadside chemical test then for the presence of marijuana?
So you're referring to the implied consent statute?
I don't know what I'm referring to, but is there a similarity to a breathalyzer?
There is, through the chair, there are the implied consent statute, which is what allows officers to do breath testing, is traditionally done as a data master instrument at a police substation. There are roadside tests as well, a portable breath test, and that is by a separate statute that allows officers, both separate statute and the implied consent form allows officers to do the roadside breath testing as well.
So really we're still faced with the same situation where somebody fails the roadside touch your nose, walk the line test and says, I'm not going to give you a specimen, or I'm not going to go to the next level. Is that where we're trying to deal with this legislation tonight?
Through the chair, I think, or if perhaps you could clarify the question. The language that you're referring to sounds like we're talking about an operating under the influence case, which is different than this ordinance in front of us.
Okay, and maybe that's answering my question. Do we need to deal with operating under the influence in a different manner as it relates to marijuana and probable cause in some other form as well? I'm happy to do this one, but do we need to clarify the ability of the officer to do X in another part of it, similar to the roadside stuff? I think that to me is more important than, you know, this deals with minors as well, but I think it's all important. I just want to make sure we didn't miss something that's going to come back and hurt us later.
Sure. Through the chair, understood. The marijuana laws are very broad, and we can investigate and prosecute marijuana-related cases under DUI law without any problem at all. We don't need to amend our statute to do that. We have been doing that for many years, and the probable cause legal test easily encompasses all observations that an officer makes. So no roadside testing in terms of saliva testing or portable breath testing is necessary, and it is rarely actually performed in a DUI investigation. This ordinance is focusing specifically on the unique prohibition on minors driving after consuming any impairing substance.
I'm fair with that, but we still do the preface conversation that they failed something prior. I think, because they're a minor, they still have to walk the line, touch their nose. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There has to be probable cause, sir, that they have consumed an impairing substance, correct?
Okay, so last question without beating this one to death. I asked it earlier. Is there, if an officer pulls me over and says, hey, we think you're impaired, I'm like, well, no, I'll prove it. Can I blow on the roadside test that I'm not consuming alcohol? Is there a similarity that somebody can say, hey, no, I've not consumed marijuana, I'll do it right now? Do we have any comparative testing that can be done on the roadside?
Through the chair, in terms of marijuana,
Yes.
there are portable saliva tests that are in testing and production that may be utilized in the future but are not currently utilized for drugs.
Okay, so the only way to really validate that you've got to take that person somewhere, do a blood draw or the next thing.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Evans?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it's another question for the law department. With respect to the statement that it has to be an impairing element that triggers this, with respect to alcohol, does that mean it has to be over 0.08 BAC, or is any amount of alcohol considered then impairing?
Through the chair, for minors, any amount of alcohol is prohibited. Alcohol, by definition, is an impairing substance.
Okay, so even 0.01 alcohol would be considered an impairing substance that would trigger this?
Yes.
The action of consuming any amount of alcohol would be illegal, and the alcohol is a valid substance for the ordinance because it is, by definition, impairing.
Thank you.
Mr. Holman?
Mr. Chair, I think it's important to actually make sure that it's understood. Ms. Thino, just to confirm through the chair, it's currently in ordinance that alcohol, any amount of alcohol, already triggered. It's already against the law, and it's already in the ordinance, correct? Any amount of alcohol.
Through the chair, that is correct, sir.
So we're just adding marijuana to make it like alcohol. Any amount.
Other comments from assembly members on this item? Please vote. You're voting on the entire thing. There are no amendments on this one. Sorry. The item is approved by the body. Next item in front of us. No, I'm going to do 14I and then go back to G. I'm happy we're on a roll. I want to get this thing done. Okay, we're on 14I. Need somebody to move item 14I. That's ordinance 2015-87.
Move to approve.
Moved and seconded by you, Ms. Gray Jackson? Okay. That item is now in front of the body. Ms. Dabowski, you want to take the lead on that one, too? That's 87.
We're on 14I.
14I.
All righty. Okay, so this is 2015-87. So essentially what this will do is this one include this one. Oh, see, you put me on. I'm all flustered here.
I'm sorry, I can go to Mr. Hall, who's probably ready.
No, I got it. This one just amends the minor offense fine schedule. I believe that's what this one is. So we're talking about. Yeah.
Look on page 3 of 4.
Yeah, page 3 of 4. You'll see personal cultivation of marijuana is added. What else did we add? Yeah, essentially this one right here, I mean, it's parity with the state, with what is passed and the restrictions that were in the ballot language. So what we're talking about too is adding, just restricting personal cultivation of marijuana, which was in the ballot measure. There's only so many plants people are supposed to grow, and amending the minor offense fine schedule. That's essentially what it is. So we're just adding it in there.
Other comments from assembly members on this item? Okay, please vote. And this is on AO 2015-87. That's approved unanimously. We're now going back to 14G, when we left it last. There was an amendment for Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson, do you want to withdraw your amendment and move this one forward? Or what, sir?
Mr. Chairman, I believe this is an amendment to my amendment, but I can withdraw my amendment. We'll just
I would
make
be
this.
happier if you'd withdraw your amendment.
We'll make this a new
Mr.
amendment.
Evans, you were the second. Can you withdraw it with him? Absolutely. Okay.
So this would
that
be-
one's gone. Now, Mr. Peterson, this amendment, do you want to bring this forward?
So this will be amendment number 4 officially, I guess, since number 3 was withdrawn.
Okay.
So I move amendment number 4.
Second.
Do you want to read it to us?
Certainly.
This goes in page 1, line 33.
Correct. Whereas it is the intent of the Assembly, as reasonably possible, to have laws and codes of the municipality of Anchorage, the state of Alaska, and neighboring local jurisdictions consistent regarding open containers of marijuana in motor vehicles, should the state of Alaska or a neighboring local jurisdiction adopt laws on this subject that differ from the Anchorage Municipal Code, it is the intent of the Assembly to re-examine Anchorage Municipal Code for additional consistency.
Who seconded that?
I did.
Mr. Honeman.
And
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason behind this is so that someone who may live in another jurisdiction neighboring Anchorage and might be traveling through and might not be aware of what our rules and regulations are would not get caught for something that was actually maybe legal in their jurisdiction where they live.
Mr. Peterson, this doesn't change our laws to reflect what's in that jurisdiction. It just says that somebody will look at the inconsistencies. So it wouldn't give somebody coming from, say, Wasilla a free pass in Anchorage.
No, it wouldn't. But it's saying that if they do have different laws than ours, then we should re-examine ours to see if we think, we might want to change. So
thank you, Mr. Peterson. I just want to make sure the public knows that this is not going to change our laws to reflect what's done in different jurisdictions.
That's correct.
Thank you. Ms. Nabowski?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment. Mr. Peterson is trying to signal a very proactive intent that as these laws are being developed, we recognize we're kind of at the forefront. And if other jurisdictions or the state has something substantially different, we will absolutely proactively, or maybe I guess that would be reactively, evaluate what an Anchorage Municipal Code is, and then the determination would be made whether we need to change or not. So it's not saying we will, it's just saying that we're committed to consistently reevaluating our own code in case something dramatically different happens along our borders.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Evans, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate all the work that went into this, but I'm opposed to adding this kind of language to code, basically writing into law something that really means nothing. It just says that, if something happens in the future and it's reasonably possible, our intention will be to relook at it. That's great, and our intention may change down the road when that ever happens. So I just think that, the law books are thick enough already without language in there that really has no impact, means nothing, and can only confuse folks. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn, sir.
Good news,
on
Mr.
the amendment in front of us.
Good news, Mr. Evans. This is not going into the code. It's just a whereas statement explaining why we're doing what we're doing. That's all.
Ms. Nabowski.
Mr. Flynn beat me to the punch. That's the reason I asked to have it moved from the original proposed place to this position. It's because it's in the whereas clause, which just signals legislative intent, but the actual code begins after the now therefore statement. So I'm comfortable with it being where it's at. Thank you.
Any other comments from Assembly members? If not, please vote on the amendment, and then we'll vote on the main motion. That amendment's approved by the body. Any other amendments, Mr. Peterson?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have one last amendment. We'll call it amendment number 5. I move amendment number 5.
What does this one say?
If you'll hit your button, I'll hit second it for you, Mr. Peterson.
I move amendment number 5.
Well,
It's the one that says on page 3, line 1.
good. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. So what does it say, Mr. Peterson?
Well, this is a technical amendment that makes the effective date. I'll read it. And Mr. Falsey actually gave me some language. So what the amendment would do would delete the words "the amendment to," and that way this section would stay. It would say this ordinance shall be effective 30 days after passage and approval by the Assembly. Before it said this amendment to this ordinance. And so this says the whole ordinance would be effective. So it's a technical amendment. Thank you.
Comments on Mr. Peterson's amendment from the Assembly members? Ms. Dembowski?
I urge approval.
Any other comments? Seeing no comments, please vote on the amendment. That is approved by the body. We're now dealing with 14G 2015-85 as amended. Comments from Assembly members? Seeing none, please vote. That item is approved by the body as amended. Mr. Oliva, come and talk to us, sir. You missed our discussion on spice.
Just to clarify, sir, we are under public comment at this point?
No, he was under appearance request earlier, but he wasn't here, so I want to let him give the opportunity now. Then we'll go to public comments. Just trying to afford maximum opportunity. Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Ron Oliva. Do you feel a disturbance in the force? That's only me. I'm here for 3 reasons tonight. One is a resolution that I hope the Assembly would have acted on in regard to Rosa Parks. The President is visiting Anchorage, and I think no other Afro-American activist has moved America as much as Rosa Parks, and my request was to either name a bus after her because she rode on a bus here in Anchorage, or a bus route. And very quickly, if our mayor and this Assembly could get together a resolution or a proclamation with possibly a plaque to go into the transit center, I think it would be historic if our president acknowledged that proclamation or dedication. And I think we could slip it in, and with his signature, he would leave his mark here in Anchorage and in Alaska, as did Rosa Parks throughout our great nation. So if you could work on that. Second thing is take back, as Dick Cheney wants to do Town Square, I think it's time to take back the shelter and the Brother Francis shelter. Take back, meaning they have not lived up to any level of responsibility to what their initial mission was. They've turned a ministry into an industry. And what I think is appalling is the fact that if you look at these statistics, which came from the Anchorage Police Department, when you have 6,856 calls within 2,500 feet of the shelter and Beans, and specifically to Beans, 1,926, and to the shelter, 3,495, I think you've created a negative environment. I think the pandemic of spice being a public health issue has come to fruition. If it wasn't spice, a vulnerable population, the way you kept it out of control, it would have been Legionnaire's disease, Ebola. It could have been a number of things, but the pandemic was coming, and now the entire community suffers because there wasn't an ambulance available. Everyone was filled with a spice-induced comatose person. I believe Beans Cafe has now bought the JP Marketing Building to make kids' kitchen meals for them. They have not, I believe, cooperated with the APD in getting security cameras, which you can buy from Costco, to assist them in the rest of the dealers. So if you have enough money to buy a building, you surely have enough money to buy security cameras, get a security guard, get a medic, and get commercial garbage pickup. Because anyone who's going to make meals for children shouldn't be an agency lining the outside of their building with this number of police calls and fire calls to dissolve fecal material. I don't think that's appropriate at all. And if we go on to the Brother Francis shelter, Beans has a $2 million budget. $300,000 profit from Bishop's Attic in Fairview, taking money out of the community. That money should be spent on a security guard, a medic, and garbage pickup there at the Brother Francis shelter.
Ron, your time is about 30 seconds. Please.
Okay, quickly extend the ordinance for camping on the boulevard. Hey, as far as purchasing my property, ML&P declined. It was too expensive. I find that unreasonable, unrealistic. My property's for sale. It's an opportunity for the city to buy it or find yourself a nonprofit, because this homeless shelter and soup kitchen isn't going to go in any other part of the city because of those statistics. And even though I like you all, not very much, but I do, I wouldn't have this homeless shelter or soup kitchen in your backyard. So it has to stay where it is, and it has to expand there. It's as simple as that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There are no questions.
Well, how do you know that, Dick? You didn't ask.
I can see on my cue. You see, I've got this little sheet that tells me. Thank you, Ron. We'll see you again, I'm sure.
Oh, take a look at those signs I gave you and look at those statistics.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Okay, we're now done. Special orders, there are none. Unfinished agenda, there is none. Audience participation. Is there anybody who would like to address the Assembly on any issue not that we haven't addressed tonight? Talk to us about anything? 3 minutes, forward, on?
I'll move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Seeing and hearing no one. Motion adjourns in order. Is there a second? We're adjourned.